Hello, this is Moze Jacobs for DeBarra Spoken Word, and for our next session on the 16th of June 2021, we're not going to have James Joyce as a special guest. He couldn't make it, but we have somebody else who is very capable of replacing him, and that's Andrea Carter. No, I'm saying that. She doesn't say. She's a very modest woman. Regardless of her achievements. Because Andrea is a solicitor, a barrister, and also a crime writer, and that's why she will be our special guest at the next session, and she'll be reading from her work and answering questions as well. Welcome, Andrea, and thank you for meeting me here on Zoom.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Moze. It's lovely to meet you virtually.
Where are you? Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Chapel Izard in Dublin, which is where I live. I've lived here for about 12 to 15 years. Yeah, I've lived in Dublin for about 15 years and lived in Chapel Izard for 12, 13 of those. Okay,
you just told me you're originally from Laois, but you also lived in Inishowen, peninsula near Northern Ireland, near Derry. Could you say something about that, because it does play a part in some or in all of your
the 5 books that of mine that are published to date are all part of the Inishowen mystery series.
Okay.
So all of the books are set on the Inishowen Peninsula, and I lived and practiced as a solicitor on the Inishowen Peninsula for 11 years. So I was there for a long time, and I still I visit very regularly, and with every book I spend time there and visit all of the locations in the books and listen to the sea and listen to the accents again and immerse myself in Inishowen. So yeah, Inishowen is almost a character in the books, very, very important to all of the books.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because it does sort of raise, I can imagine it raises questions, because the protagonist is a solicitor herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Ben O'Keefe.
That's right. Yes, that's right. And also an outsider, as I was.
Okay.
I'm from Laois, so I'm rural, and I was rural before I moved to Inishowen. Ben is different in that she comes from Dublin, so she's more urban when she starts off. Yeah, there are definitely similarities there between Ben O'Keefe as the protagonist and who I was when I was practicing law in Inishowen.
Could you tell me how have you always wanted to be a writer as well as a solicitor lawyer, or did it happen suddenly?
I think I've always, I'm a voracious reader, as all writers are, but I don't think I ever thought that I could be a writer. I always thought that my career would be in law. And when I was in school, I wanted to be a barrister. I eventually ended up being a barrister. And I practiced, my academic qualifications are all in law, until I went back and did a master's years and years later. So I don't think I ever really thought it was a possibility. When I was practicing law in Inishowen, when I was practicing as a solicitor, I started to write, but just purely for myself, as a stress reliever, really. You know, I would worry about something that I was doing at work in the middle of the night, and instead of reaching for the wine bottle, I'd go to the laptop and I'd start to type these crazy scenes involving a solicitor in Inishowen who was able to do things that I would never have been able to do, and say things that I would never have been able to get away with saying. And so it was really it was for myself that I was writing those scenes. I never ever thought they would be published. So I think it took me almost to finish a book before I realized that there was a possibility that I could be published. And at that point, I was starting to have a little bit of success with the odd bit of flash fiction, or getting shortlisted for competitions and that kind of thing. And then I started to think, maybe there's a possibility somebody else might read these writings, not just myself.
And the flash fiction and maybe short stories that you did during the initial period, were they outtakes from the book or were they unrelated?
No, they were all, the first thing I ever had published was a piece of flash fiction that I entered into a competition run by the Irish Times and Powers Whiskey in aid of the Irish Hospice Foundation. And I think it was 450 words. And they selected, they had lots and lots of entries, but they selected 40 of the entries for publication in a little anthology, which was then sold at Christmas in aid of the Irish Hospice Foundation. But the most exciting thing was that the book was launched by Maeve Binchy. So we all got to meet Maeve and she got us all to sign our story in her copy of the book. So I autographed my story for Maeve Binchy. And I mean, she would have known how much that would have meant to all of these unpublished writers. So that was the first thing I ever had published, and it probably is still not the most exciting, but certainly one of the most exciting experiences of publishing. I have it here somewhere, you know, I'm sure I could find it there. Yeah.
Okay.
My first published story, and it's page and a half.
And is it about law? Is it in your field?
No, it's not. It's about a woman who runs, I think a woman in her 70s who runs naked down a GA pitch in the middle of the hurling final.
So how did that come about? How did that, was it just an idea that popped up?
No, it was just, I can't remember where that idea came from initially, you know, but her husband is sitting watching. I think we had to include Powers Whiskey in the story, and her husband is ill. I think he's had a stroke and he's watching the All-Ireland, and it's the first time he can't go to the All-Ireland, and so she makes her presence felt and he cheers her at the television. So yeah, it was just yeah, I mean, all the stories in the anthology are a bit like that. They were about, you know, they were kind of uplifting stories. So okay, I'm proud of it. It was the first story I ever wrote that was published.
So how did you go from that to an actual book? Your first book?
I actually had written 2 books before I was published, and my second book was the first book that was published. So I wrote Treacherous Strand, which is the second one in the series. I wrote that first while I was working in Inishowen. I wrote probably about a third of it, and then when I moved to Dublin to practice as a barrister, I continued writing it, and I started doing writing courses and workshops and started taking it a little bit more seriously as a hobby. I mean, I was still practicing as a barrister, and it never even occurred to me still at that stage that I would be published. But I came to the end of that book and I finished it, and I entered it into the Irish Writer Centre Novel Fair competition, and it was longlisted, and that gave me a bit of encouragement. And so I decided I would continue with writing the same character, and so I ended up writing Death at Whitewater Church, and it was that book which was, to me, was the second in the series, which got me an agent and eventually a publisher. And so it got into the Novel Fair. Actually, I didn't get a publisher or agent through the Novel Fair, but I think it helped. It certainly helped. So I ended up with a London agent and then a London publisher. And I had Treacherous Strand, which was the first book that I had written, which was fairly ragged, to edit and turn into the second book in the series. So that's how I ended up being published, really. It was a fairly traditional route. You know, I sent it out to agents and got an agent, and then she sent it out to publishers once she
you sent it out without somebody to introduce you to the agent?
Yeah, absolutely. It was I had no contacts. I had no in with the publishing area at all. I got a copy of the Writers and Artists Yearbook, and it was this one, 2011.
Okay.
And I still have my markings on who I sent, which agents I sent the book to, or my first 3 chapters to. They're still marked in there, and some of them are crossed off, and some of them have question marks and dates and all that kind of thing. And so I did it blind. I sent my first 3 chapters off to whichever agents interested me or who I saw were interested in crime fiction. And I got lots and lots of rejections and lots of silence, you know, lots of times I didn't get a response at all. And then eventually I got the lovely email saying, you know, I loved your first 3 chapters. I'd love to see the rest of the book. And so I sent the rest of the book. And that happened, I think, 2 or 3 times. People asked for a full manuscript. And then I got an email saying, will you, can I ring you? And I took a call from my now agent, Kerry, who asked me, would I come over to London the following week and meet her? And so I did. And then I signed with her, and she took me out for lunch, and I felt like I was...
That sounds like a fairy tale, actually.
Honestly, I thought I was on a film set. I really did, because her office was in Soho, you know, it was close to Carnaby Street, and I just thought that, and I walked through 7 Dials, you know, and if you're an Agatha Christie fan, that is, you know, very much central to her world. And I felt like I was on a film set, and it was just really exciting. Having said that, she told me she loved my book and that she, you know, was signing me up. And after that, she worked on it with me for about 6 months. So you have to learn very early on as a writer, if you're going to be published, that you're going to be edited. So even if somebody tells you that they love your book, they love it subject to it being changed quite fundamentally, usually, you know. So she worked on it with me for, I think she signed me in July, and then by the time it came to November, December, she decided the book was ready to be sent out to publishers, and she started sending it out to editors in various different publishing houses. And nothing, she got lots of kind of half interest, and then by the time we got to February, we had 3 offers. So she then rang me again and said, any chance you can come over and meet this editor? And this was the editor from Little Brown, who are very big, one of the big, part of the big 5, really. And so that was that's another you know, scene from a film. I flew over, and of course there was I remember it so well because there was a tube strike, and I thought I was going to be late, and I was wearing high heels. I never wear high heels. I was in bits by the time I finally managed to get there. And I limped in to the meeting, and by the time I was on the tube on the way to Heathrow that evening, I had an offer, and I had
That's amazing. How many agents did you approach in the first instance?
Oh, I could give you, if I went back and had a look at I probably have the list somewhere, you know, but I'd say
dozens.
More than dozens. I mean, you know, I would say you're looking at maybe 75-ish.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was sending out quite a few each. I was sending out quite a few each week. I would send them out, and the great thing about it, of course, is that you don't have to post them anymore. There was a while where you just had to get yourself a whole pile of, you know, brown envelopes and spend a lot of money on postage and photocopying and all of that. And I did a bit of that because at the time when I was submitting, some agents weren't accepting by email. They were accepting only by post. And so I did quite a bit of that. But I then got to a point where I decided, right, to hell with it, I'm just going to submit to those that accept by email. And every Monday I would send another 6. And so I would list in my diary the 6 that I had sent. So I worked really hard at submitting. And I was really careful as well. I did a lot of research in terms of who particular agents represented. And so I was able, each letter that I sent was personal to that particular agent. I would say, I'm really interested in your agency because you represent X and whose work I love and that kind of thing. So
that sounds like a lot of work and a lot of stamina and a lot of belief in yourself.
Yeah. Sorry?
A lot of belief in yourself as well.
Well, I don't know. I just wanted to give myself the best chance. And if I had put that amount of work, I mean, I pretty much spent about 10 years writing this book. So I could certainly spend a year sending out the book, 3 chapters of the book to various people, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it had probably taken me 10 years to write the first book, on and off. I mean, I was working as a solicitor and then as a barrister as well. So it wasn't full time. But yeah, I mean, it was, I thought, oh, sure, I'll give it its best chance, you know, let people see it. And, you know, it was worth the work. Yeah, it paid off in the end.
Okay, that's great. And inspirational, actually, for anyone who wants to break into the publishing world. Just think about it. And
you see, I guess that's the plus that I can pass on to people, that, you know, there is this perception sometimes that, you know, lots of people get published through contacts and it's about knowing the right people and all of that. And look, you know, I'm sure there's a huge element of that, but my experience was not that. My experience was applying, submitting, and, you know, I think maybe 3 or 4 different agents asked me for the full manuscript. By the time Kerry, who is my agent and has been my agent since then, said to me, yeah, I want to sign you. So, and then I was able, and it was lovely, I was able to get back to the 3 others going, you didn't read it quickly enough, I'm gone.
Very sorry. Okay, I've 2 more areas of question. I've just started reading one of your books on the bus. It's really nice because it's Well of Ice. Am I saying it right now? Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I said the ice well before, and it's nice because it's May now, and not a very sunny May. But I loved reading Christmas stuff. You know, you're in at Christmas, and there's lots of, I don't know where it will go, but there is lots of little things written that you think, oh, I wonder how that's going to play out, or I wonder what that's going to end up with, you know, in her relationship and all sorts of things. There's little mysteries are already unfolding, but I also think that is sort of deliberately, like you're teasing people in a way, like, or is that what you do, or is you plant little seeds, or?
Well, I guess, you know, crime writing, all fiction is about, you know, stopping the reader from putting the book down, isn't it?
Okay.
You know, I mean, if the reader puts the book down, you have failed, especially if they don't pick it back up again. So, and I think crime writers are particularly good at that. I think that is they're particularly good at stopping the reader from putting the book down. And I think that is probably one of the reasons that crime is one of the genres that sells. That people, they're page turners. But I think what makes people continue to turn the page is good characterization. You know, I think people, there's no point in having a very clever plot with, you know, twists and turns and the puzzle and all of that, if people aren't invested in the characters that they're reading about, and if they don't care about the characters that they're reading about. And I always think that suspense, which is a big part of crime fiction, and it's also a part of non-crime fiction as well, and it's what keeps people turning the pages. Suspense is all about the reader caring about what happens to the characters and their fear for the characters and their anxiety and their, you know, and so I think that's what I'm trying to do, rather than just you know, playing with the reader. And I think if you feel that the writer is just playing with you for the sake of it, and
No,
so,
I didn't feel that. I didn't feel.
oh,
It's just
no,
that I was aware that, for example, and it was about caring for your character, because there is something in there that suggests that maybe her love interest is not, you know, there's something going on there, and you think, oh, I hope he's
yeah,
not, you know, seeing someone else. I mean, that's what I felt.
yeah.
But and then I
And
want to know if that is going to happen.
that's going to happen or not. And I think the Well Advised, the one that you're reading at the moment, is the third one, and there is an arc which sort of completes with the third one. The first, second, and third follow a particular thread in Ben's own story, which sort of comes to an end in book 3. And so if you'd read book 1 and 2, you'd be very anxious at this stage, or I would want you to be very anxious at this stage, because you would know where the danger and the threat.
So you would recommend that? I mean, this came from the library, so I didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
You'd recommend that people start with book 1?
I would, yeah, I would. I mean, I think if you, they all have a mystery, which is a standalone. So each of the books can be read on their own, and they can be read out of order as well. But if you want to read all 5 of them, or if you want to read a few of them, I would read them in order, because there is a continuing story involving Ben. I mean, Ben and Malloy's story continue throughout the books. So
good. I'm glad to hear it. When you write one book, do you first construct the plot, like a kind of framework?
No, I'm yeah, crime fiction writers in particular are split really between plotters and pantsers, and I'm very much a pantser. I write by the seat of my pants. I have no idea where the story is going at all when I start it. And it often, you know, I've reached the 3rd draft and I still don't know who the killer is.
Oh.
But that's the way that works for me. I have tried to write in a different way. I've tried to plot out in detail, and it just doesn't work for me. I get bored. I like to write my book the way I like to discover my book, the way the reader discovers it, so that it unfolds for me as I'm writing it. And I write in layers. So my first draft is probably about half the length of the final book. And it's an absolute mess. The characters' names change halfway through. There's hardly any punctuation. The grammar is terrible. The vocabulary is really lazy. But there is a thread of a story going through it, and it's really skeletal, the first draft, and I leave it alone, and then I go back to it about 2 weeks later, and I start to write the second draft over the first draft. I'm editing it, so it's getting fuller with the second draft, and with each subsequent draft I probably write about 5 drafts by the time it finally goes into my agent or my editor. And with each draft, I am filling in setting and atmosphere, and I'm getting to know my characters. My characters are coming to life with each draft, and I'm figuring out connections between them. I'm realizing that, oh, he went to school with him and they're cousins. and sometimes I will merge 2 characters. If I've got 2 relatively thin, weak characters, I'll often merge them, and they will become a very full, decent character in draft 3, when they were 2, you know, matchstick men in draft 1. And so that's how I begin to know. It's almost as if the characters germinate for me with each draft and become fuller. And as they become fuller, and as I begin to get to know them better, I then eventually will know who the killer is and why.